Walter Greenstone had spent a lifetime earning respect. As the founder and CEO of a global logistics empire, he was revered as a titan in his field, a man who built success through sheer willpower and ruthless precision. At 61, he lived in a sprawling estate nestled in the rolling hills outside Portland, Oregon. The estate, known simply as Halcyon Grove, was a marvel of modern architecture, glass walls, open spaces, and a landscape that bloomed in every season. It was the kind of place people featured in magazines. But for Walter, it was just a fortress, beautiful, yes, but also isolated. His wife, Evelyn, had always balanced his sharp edges. Where he was calculating and rational, she was empathetic and intuitive. They had built their life together over 4 decades, raising a son who now lived overseas. Evelyn filled the home with warmth, fresh flowers in the hallway, rescued cats lounging on armchairs, soft jazz on Sunday mornings. One crisp November evening, they returned home from dinner with old friends. As their chauffeur pulled up to the massive iron gate, something felt off. Walter stepped out first, eyes scanning the perimeter as Evelyn chatted with the driver. When they approached the front steps, he froze. The front door was ajar. His gut clenched. "Stay in the car," he told Evelyn, already walking toward the house. "Wait, Walter. Let's call the police," she urged, her voice tight with concern. But Walter was not a man who waited. He headed into the garage, grabbed a heavy flashlight, and entered the home. Inside, silence clung to the walls like fog. He flicked on the hallway lights, sweeping the beam across the marble floors. Everything seemed untouched, until he heard it. A creak. Upstairs. He moved slowly, climbing the staircase one careful step at a time, every sense alert. At the top of the stairs, just past the family portrait gallery, a shadow darted down the hall. Before he could shout, something slammed into him. Hard. The impact sent him crashing into a side table, pain shooting through his shoulder and neck as his head struck the floor. Dazed, he caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, male, in a hoodie, bolting down the stairs and out the door. By the time Evelyn found him, Walter was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his breath shallow. "Walter. Oh my God. I'm okay," he muttered, gripping the banister as she helped him sit up. "Just a cut." A quick inspection revealed only minor theft. Some of Evelyn's jewelry was gone. But what truly unmoored Walter was a broken glass frame lying face down on the hardwood floor. Inside was a photograph, a sunlit day at their old family cabin, years ago. He, Evelyn, and their son were smiling, arms around each other. Now, the glass was shattered, the edges sharp, the moment irreparably cracked. Walter crouched beside it, picking up the shards with trembling fingers. "Damn thief," he muttered, more to himself than to Evelyn. But deep down, he wasn't just angry at the thief. He was angry at the vulnerability. That night, Walter didn't sleep. While Evelyn rested beside him, he stared at the ceiling, planning. By morning, he had made up his mind. He contacted a top-tier security firm. Within the week, Halcyon Grove was transformed into a digital fortress. Motion-sensitive perimeter beams, hidden thermal cameras, encrypted entry gates, fingerprint recognition, no expense was spared. During the installation, the lead technician asked him to create a password for the gate's emergency override. It had to be an 8-digit sequence, easy to remember but hard to guess. Walter paused. Then he typed it in silently, not explaining to Evelyn what it meant. She watched the transformation of their serene home into what now resembled a private embassy. "Don't you think this is a bit much?" she asked gently one morning, as 2 men mounted cameras above the rose arbor. Walter didn't look away from the monitor wall. "After what happened? I'm not taking any more chances. It's starting to feel like we're the ones being locked in," she said quietly. He didn't answer. In the days that followed, Walter developed a new routine, checking the perimeter cameras from his phone before coming home, reviewing motion logs, rewatching recorded footage while sipping his evening scotch. The sense of control comforted him, even if it made the house feel more like a vault than a home. But one morning, around 3 a.m., Walter stirred from restless sleep and wandered into his study. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heating system. He poured himself a drink and sat at his desk, glancing at the live feeds on the monitor wall. And froze. There, on the edge of the property, beneath the massive oak tree that once held his son's childhood tire swing, someone was lying on the ground, motionless. A person. How had someone gotten past the sensors? His hands flew to his phone as he called the security line. The technician on duty answered groggily. "We haven't had any breach, sir," the man said. "No alarms triggered, no sensor trips. But let me check the logs. Hold on." Walter stared at the monitor. The figure shifted slightly in the grass. The technician returned. "Sir. Someone used the emergency override code at 11:08 last night. The one you entered during setup." Walter's blood ran cold. "That's not possible. Only I knew that code." The technician paused. "Well. Someone else clearly knew it, sir." Walter hung up without another word. He threw on his coat and made his way into the cold night air, flashlight in hand. The grass was slick with dew, the wind sharp on his skin. He moved toward the oak tree, heart pounding. He stopped just a few feet away. The person stirred. Then slowly turned over. A young woman. Hair tangled, face pale, eyes sunken, but unmistakable. Her voice broke the silence. "Hi, Dad. I hope I didn't scare you." Walter's heart seized in his chest. "Nina? Nina?" Walter's voice cracked, barely audible over the wind rustling the branches above. The woman sat up slowly, her movements sluggish, as if every joint protested. Her face, once full of youthful defiance, now looked weathered. There were dark circles under her eyes, dirt streaked across her cheeks, and a thinness to her frame that spoke of long days without shelter. "Yeah," she whispered. "It's me." Walter took a trembling step closer. What are you doing here?" Nina gave a weary half-smile and gestured toward the tree. "I didn't know where else to go. When I saw the gate, I remembered that you always use important dates for passwords. I guessed." He was stunned. The override code he had entered, the date of his mother's death, was something only Nina could have known. She had been the one to hold his hand at the funeral, her young fingers wrapped tightly around his. At the time, she was just 12. She'd said, "Don't worry, Daddy. I'll remember this day for both of us." And apparently, she had. Walter's throat tightened. "You got in? Without tripping any alarms?" "I used the code, Dad." She looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. "I knew you'd pick that day. You always said it was the turning point in your life." He staggered back slightly, overwhelmed by emotion. 100 questions collided in his mind. Where had she been? Why now? Why this way? Why didn't you call? Right? Anything? "I didn't think I could," Nina said, her voice cracking. "I didn't think you'd want me back." Walter looked at his daughter, this ghost from the past he had boxed up and locked away. For so long, she had been absent, vanished after dropping out of college, after the arguments, the fights, the long stretch of silence. She had been 22 when she left. 10 years had passed since then. "I didn't know if you were even alive," he said, stepping closer, his voice trembling. "I searched. We hired people to find you. But you disappeared. I needed to," she murmured. "I needed to get away. From everything. From you." Her words landed like punches. Walter swallowed hard. "From me?" She nodded. "You couldn't see me, Dad. I was hurting, and all you ever gave me were lectures and comparisons. You never asked me why I couldn't breathe. Why everything felt heavy." Walter sank to a bench beneath the tree, clutching the edge. "I didn't understand. I didn't know how to deal with what you were going through. You always had everything: education, safety, money." Nina sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. "That's the thing. You thought that was enough. That being taken care of meant I had no reason to suffer. But depression doesn't care about bank accounts, Dad. And when I tried to talk about it, you told me to snap out of it. I felt like a failure just for feeling." Walter rubbed his forehead, his pulse pounding. "I was wrong. I know that now. I just didn't know what else to do. You tried to fix me like I was a business problem," she said, not angrily, but with the weight of truth. "But I didn't need fixing. I needed listening. compassion. They sat in silence under the tree that had once held a tire swing, where she had spent summer afternoons reading, or laughing with her mother. Back then, everything had felt simpler. "I'm sorry," Walter whispered finally. "Truly, deeply sorry." Nina looked down at her hands. "You were the first person to tell me that vulnerability was weakness. So I believed it. Until the weight got too much, and I ran." "And now?" he asked, voice raw. "Why now?" "Because I don't want to run anymore," she replied, tears forming. "I'm tired, Dad. I've been living out of shelters, under bridges, behind closed doors. I've battled addiction. I've been sober for 9 months now, but I still feel like I'm disappearing. I remembered this place, the tree, the swing. And I thought, maybe you'd still be here." Walter couldn't stop the tears anymore. They streamed down his face, hot and unrelenting. "I never stopped loving you," he said. "Not for a second. But I failed you. I thought protecting you meant keeping you in line, controlling the narrative. I see now that I lost you because I never listened." Nina reached over and touched his hand gently. "You're here now. That counts. I want to help," he said firmly. "Not just with money or place to stay. I want to learn how to be better. How to be the father you needed." She leaned her head on his shoulder, like she had done as a child. "Then help me heal. Be here. That's all I've ever wanted." They sat that way for a long time, the stars blinking softly above them. The air was cold, but neither moved. Eventually, Walter stood and extended his hand. "Come inside. Let's start over." Nina hesitated. "You're not a guest," he added. "You're my daughter. This is still your home." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and followed him. Inside the house, Evelyn woke with a start when she heard the front door. She rushed down the stairs, and her breath caught when she saw them. "Nina," she gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Nina barely managed a nod before Evelyn pulled her into a tight embrace, tears falling freely. "Welcome home," Evelyn whispered. That night, Walter didn't check the cameras. He didn't rewatch any footage or monitor security logs. Instead, he stood outside Nina's new room, listening to her quiet breathing, her peace. His hand hovered over the doorknob, but he didn't enter. He didn't need to. He smiled, turned away, and whispered into the hallway light, "Good night, baby." Morning light poured gently through the east-facing windows of Halcyon Grove, illuminating the stone floors and the subtle sheen of dust that had begun to settle on unused corners. Walter stood by the kitchen island, nursing a mug of black coffee, eyes distant as they drifted out toward the backyard where the old oak tree cast long shadows. He hadn't slept much. Not because of fear, no, not this time, but because his mind had returned to places he hadn't dared revisit in years. In the room down the hall, Nina was sleeping soundly in a guest bedroom they'd hastily prepared the night before. Evelyn had brought her warm pajamas and a hot water bottle, insisting on comfort. Walter had merely stood nearby, awkward in his own home, unsure how to bridge a decade's worth of silence with a single night of shelter. Now, standing there in the stillness of dawn, he felt the full weight of what had unraveled in their family, not suddenly, but slowly, like a fraying thread no one noticed until it snapped. Evelyn joined him, placing her hand gently on his back. "She's still asleep," she said, voice soft. "She needed rest." Walter nodded, but said nothing. "She used the override code," he finally muttered. "I know," Evelyn replied, watching his face. She remembered. "I didn't think anyone remembered that date but me." "She never forgot, Walter," Evelyn said. "She just couldn't carry it the way you did." They stood in silence for a while. Evelyn poured herself some tea. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment. "You always believed you had to protect us with control, with systems and structure. But families don't work like that. They aren't companies. They're messy, emotional. And sometimes they break." Walter turned to her, eyes heavy. "I didn't know how to help her. When the depression started, she changed. And I didn't understand it. I thought I could logic her out of it." "She wasn't a spreadsheet," Evelyn replied gently. "She was drowning. And we didn't even see it." He sat down heavily at the table, burying his face in his hands. "I kept telling her she had everything. A good home, opportunities, money, What more could she want? I said things I can't take back, Evelyn. I called her ungrateful. I told her to toughen up. I said she was weak. She was hurting, Evelyn whispered, sitting beside him. And so were you. But hurt people don't always know how to help each other. Walter looked up, eyes red. Do you think she can ever forgive me? I think, Evelyn said, placing her hand over his, that she already has. She came back. That's not just survival, that's a cry for connection. Later that morning, Nina emerged, showered and dressed in a borrowed sweatshirt. She looked cleaner, but no less fragile. They ate breakfast together in silence, the clinking of spoons and forks the only sound. I'm sorry I came unannounced, she finally said, not meeting their eyes. Walter cleared his throat. You don't need to apologize. Not for coming home. Nina looked up, her gaze wary. It hasn't been home in a long time. Evelyn reached across the table. It can be again. If you want it to be. For a moment, Nina's guard wavered. I didn't come to stay forever, she said. I just didn't know where else to go. I've been in a program. Recovery. I'm trying to stay clean. It's been hard. Walter leaned forward. You've been doing this alone? Nina nodded. Mostly. Some group meetings. A counselor. But I'm tired, Dad. It's like I've been carrying a suitcase full of rocks and I don't even remember when I picked it up. Walter's heart clenched. Then let us carry it with you now. She looked at him, skeptical. Why now? Because I finally realize I didn't lose you because you ran away. I lost you because I wasn't there when you needed me to stay, he said, voice low. And I don't want to make that mistake again. Tears welled in Nina's eyes, but she blinked them back. It's not going to be easy. I don't expect it to be, Walter replied. But I'll be here. Every step. Over the following days, life slowly rearranged itself. The house, once a monument to sterile luxury, began to hum again. Evelyn opened the curtains more. She baked, something she hadn't done in years. Nina helped, clumsily but with laughter, dusting herself in flour as she shaped uneven bread rolls. Walter called a therapist who specialized in family trauma and recovery. Not for Nina, but for all of them. They scheduled their first session. He also made a quiet donation to the recovery center Nina had been attending, under an alias. It wasn't penance, but gratitude. Nina began journaling again. She sat under the oak tree every afternoon, scribbling thoughts, sometimes reading aloud to Evelyn. They spoke of art, of music, of books they both once loved. Walter listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, he chose his words carefully. One afternoon, Nina asked to visit the room that used to be hers. Evelyn had kept it intact, dusted and waiting, like a preserved memory. Nina stood in the doorway, taking it in, the posters on the wall, the old corkboard with yellowed notes, a cracked photo frame beside the lamp. She picked up the photo and smiled. I used to think this was the last happy moment, she said. But maybe. It was just the middle. Walter stood behind her, silent, then finally asked, what would make it feel like home again? Nina turned to him. Not pretending the past didn't happen. Just letting it be part of the story without letting it define the ending. Walter nodded slowly. I can do that, he said. And he meant it. Spring arrived early at Halcyon Grove. The trees bloomed with unexpected urgency, as if nature herself had been holding her breath and could finally exhale. It felt symbolic, appropriate even, because inside the once still walls of the estate, a transformation was underway too. It began with a simple conversation. I want to mark the time I've been clean, Nina said one morning at breakfast, her eyes tentative but hopeful. Not with a party or anything. Just something personal. Something to remind myself I'm growing. Walter looked up from his coffee. Do you have something in mind? I was thinking. Maybe we could plant something, she replied. A tree, maybe. Like. A new one. Beside the oak. Walter's heart leapt. That tree, the oak, had become more than just a landmark. It was where she had returned to him, where their bond had been rediscovered in the quiet darkness of that first night. Planting a new tree beside it felt like the perfect metaphor. Then we'll plant it together, he said, glancing at Evelyn, who nodded warmly. They spent the week planning. Not extravagantly, this wasn't for show. It was private, sacred in a way. Nina chose a cherry blossom sapling, drawn to the idea that it would bloom briefly, beautifully, each year. It's a reminder, she explained, that beauty doesn't have to last forever to be meaningful. Walter handled the logistics, soil testing, placement, protective fencing. He involved Nina in every step. He no longer tried to take over. He simply offered his help and presence, and that, it turned out, was all she had ever wanted. On the morning of the planting, the three of them stood in the garden together. Evelyn brought out a small spade and handed it to Nina, who knelt beside the old oak. Walter crouched beside her, digging with his hands, not caring about the dirt under his nails or the ache in his knees. They took turns filling the hole around the cherry blossom tree. When it was secure, Nina stood and brushed off her jeans, her face streaked with a few tears and a dusty smile. "I want to remember this day," she whispered. "Not just because of the tree. But because it's the first time in a long time I felt like I belonged." "You never stopped belonging," Walter said softly. "Even when I didn't know how to show it." They stood in silence for a while, looking at the two trees, one old, gnarled, and strong, the other young and fragile but full of promise. "Thank you," she said to them both. "For not giving up." "You gave us a reason not to," Evelyn replied. Later that evening, they sat on the porch, watching the last light of day fade over the garden. Nina had prepared a small flower arrangement, wildflowers and clover from the nearby fields, carefully arranged into a mason jar. "This is to honor what came before," she said, placing it at the base of the cherry tree. "The pain, the memories, the years I lost. They're still part of me. But they're not all of me." Walter listened quietly, letting the words settle deep into his bones. For the first time in years, the air around them felt light, not because their wounds had healed completely, but because they had stopped pretending they didn't exist. As they shared a quiet dinner on the porch, Evelyn suggested they make this planting an annual tradition, each year, something new to symbolize progress. Nina agreed with a sparkle in her eye. "Next year, maybe lavender," she said. "Or rosemary." "Why those?" Walter asked. "Lavender for calm," Nina replied. "And rosemary for remembrance." He smiled. "Then we'll make room." That night, Walter found himself walking the halls of the house again. But instead of checking the security feeds, he wandered into the study and sat at his desk. On a whim, he opened an old file drawer, the one where he kept personal mementos. Inside, he found a folder labeled Nina, School Projects. It was dusty, untouched for years. He opened it slowly, flipping through art from elementary school, a poem she'd written in middle school called "The World Feels Big, but My Heart Feels Small." He dismissed it at the time as childish, melodramatic. Now, it nearly broke him. She had been crying for help even then. And he had missed it. But he wasn't missing it anymore. Walter spent the rest of the evening writing. Not an email. Not a speech. A letter. "Dear Nina. There are so many things I wish I'd done differently. So many moments I let slip through my fingers because I thought being a good father meant being a strong one, and I misunderstood what strength really was." The words flowed, halting, messy, sincere. When he was done, he folded the letter and left it outside her door, unsure if she'd even read it. The next morning, he found a note in its place. "Dad. I read it. I cried. I forgave you a long time ago. But now I think I can begin to trust you again. Thank you for seeing me. P.S. You still make your W's weird when you write cursive. Never change." Walter laughed, a deep, unburdened laugh, and placed the note in his breast pocket, close to his heart. As spring deepened, Halcyon Grove came alive. It wasn't just the gardens that bloomed, it was the people inside. Conversations returned to the breakfast table. Laughter filtered through the halls. The home began to feel less like a showroom and more like a sanctuary. The cherry blossom tree, still slender and young, swayed in the breeze outside the window, its petals a soft reminder that even after the harshest winters, something beautiful could still take root. Summer arrived at Halcyon Grove not with fanfare, but with quiet grace. The days were longer now, soaked in golden light, and the cherry blossom tree, still young, still finding its strength, had begun to stretch skyward, leaves growing dense and vibrant. The garden was flourishing, and so was the family inside the house. Walter stood at the large picture window in the living room, watching Nina and Evelyn in the yard. They were hanging wind chimes on the oak tree, laughing about how they used to make them out of bottle caps and string. The sound of their laughter, so natural, so intertwined, warmed the very air in the room. He never realized how much he had missed that sound until it returned. Gone were the endless days of silence broken only by the clicking of security cameras and the hum of electronics. Gone were the sterile routines that made Halcyon Grove feel more like a retreat for royalty than a real, breathing home. Now, Walter found himself rising each morning not to check alarm systems, but to make pancakes. He burned them often. Nina teased him for it constantly. He secretly loved that. One evening, after dinner, the three of them sat on the porch beneath strings of soft lights. A breeze carried the scent of lavender and rosemary, just planted by Nina a week earlier, like she'd promised. The flowers hadn't bloomed yet, but their presence was enough. They were symbols. Intentions. A declaration that healing had taken root and was quietly doing its work. "I've been thinking about the house," Walter said suddenly. Nina and Evelyn turned to him. "I built it to impress," he continued, swirling the last of his wine in his glass. "To keep people out. I wanted it to be secure, elegant, untouchable. But somewhere along the way, I made it hard to get in, even for the people I loved." Evelyn reached over and touched his hand. "You didn't know." "I should have," he said. Then he looked at Nina. "Especially with you. I thought I was protecting you by being strict, by building walls around you. I thought that's what a good father did." Nina smiled softly. "Turns out I just needed you to sit next to me and ask if I was okay." He nodded, heart aching with both regret and gratitude. "It took me too long to learn that. But I'm learning now." She squeezed his hand. "I know, Dad. And I see it. Every day." They sat in silence again, listening to the wind chimes they'd hung earlier. The music was random, unpredictable, just like life, but beautiful all the same. Nina stood and walked toward the cherry blossom sapling. She knelt beside it, gently touching one of the tender branches. "It's growing," she said, glancing back at them. Walter rose and joined her. "So are you." She looked up at him, a tear slipping down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "And you, too." In that moment, Walter thought back to the night she returned, to her lying beneath the tree, her voice tremulous but familiar, the way she used the override code, the memory of her childhood pet, the ceremony they used to hold in the fall. All those layers of loss and love converging in a single moment of reunion. He realized something he had never quite put into words. "Do you remember why I chose that code?" he asked. Nina nodded. "Because it was the day we buried Moxie. My rabbit." "Yes," he said. "But it wasn't just about her. That was the first time I saw you hurt, really hurt, and didn't try to stop it. I just held you. I didn't try to solve it. I let you feel. I think, deep down, I knew I'd need to remember that lesson again one day." Nina stood and embraced him. "Thank you for remembering." Evelyn joined them, and the three stood in the moonlit yard, a quiet family reunion beneath the whispering trees. A few nights later, Walter sat alone in his study, not out of habit, but by choice. He was writing again, letters, this time, to his younger self. Letters he would never send, but needed to write. "Dear Walter. Stop believing that being strong means never crying. Stop thinking love is shown only through provision and control. Start listening. Start sitting in silence with the people you love. Let them teach you how to stay." He folded the letter, tucked it into a box with others, and placed it beside the photo of his family taken years ago. This time, he didn't replace the cracked glass. He left it as it was, broken, but intact. Honest. The next morning, Evelyn found Walter outside trimming the hedges. She laughed. "You? Gardening? That's new." He smirked. "Nina says it's meditative." "It suits you," she said. "You're less sharp around the edges." Walter glanced at the cherry blossom tree. "She's softened all of us." That weekend, they decided to open the gates of Halcyon Grove to the community for a small gathering. Not an extravagant event, just a few neighbors, old friends, even some of Nina's peers from her recovery group. There was food, music, and laughter. For the first time in decades, the house echoed with more than footsteps. Someone asked Walter, "So what's the secret to all this?" He paused, looked around, and smiled, learning that love can't be locked behind a gate. That night, when the guests had left and the candles had burned low, Walter, Evelyn, and Nina sat under the oak tree. The wind carried the scent of cherry blossoms. The stars were visible through the canopy, silent witnesses to all that had changed. Walter looked at his daughter, no longer lost, no longer a stranger. And he realized that while he had spent most of his life building a fortress, he had now found something worth more than anything inside it. A home. Not because of the architecture, but because love lived there again. And that, at last, was his real treasure.